This is a session that is going to be, I think, quite unique compared to what others might hear or learn about in the context of AI and how it is impacting the corporate travel sector, given Kevin's extraordinary background. Kevin today is the general partner and founder of Rack House Venture Capital, a firm that invests into AI native companies. But dating back to earlier in his career, which I'm sure he'll speak a bit about, Kevin was Uber's original head of data science and truly a pioneer in developing what we now know today as dynamic pricing. I think it's important, again, just kind of thinking about the table stakes for kind of where we are in the context of corporate travel today and the opportunity ahead. So many of you that are joining today's session are doing so through the lens of being members of something that we launched a matter of months ago when we heard a consistent set of refrains from leaders across the industry. And this is specific to buyers, folks that are leading global travel programs, although I know that we have folks across a number of different disciplines within corporate travel joining today. But the three common phrases that we heard were, one, I'm part of a small team in a large organization. Two, I'm being asked to do more with fewer resourcing than ever before. And three, I'm being asked to figure out how can I bring AI into my corporate travel program in a way that is substantive, material, and ideally transformative. And so we launched an initiative called the Corporate Travel AI Network. We thought about 15 or 20 people would sign up, and now we have about 250 members that have all come together to connect, learn, and share. And we initially envisioned this webinar as exclusive to the Corporate Travel AI Network. We've done others in the past. We will do many more in the future. But there was such an intense interest in hearing what Kevin had to say and what he's seeing beyond the context of just travel and mobility that we uniquely decided to open this one up to the broader industry at large. I'll post a link to the Corporate Travel AI Network. It is exclusively for travel buyers in the chat in a minute. And anyone that isn't a part of it and would like to explore joining, takes 10 to 15 seconds to apply. You can do so there. I'll also post links to Kevin and my LinkedIn's, where we share a lot of content and learnings there as well to make sure that we can continue the conversation. But just to, again, kind of set the ground of where we are today, I think it's important to acknowledge that corporate travel is a $1.5 trillion industry, rapidly growing. GBTA announced that it expects it to hit about $2 trillion by 2029. But we're at this moment where the foundation of travel data lives in disparate systems, has remarkable challenges to be able to really leverage the true power of AI. And I heard this in two different conversations that I had with travel leaders earlier today, in fact. And so the opportunity here is for the programs that are built on top of the right data foundation, the advantages that will compound are quite extraordinary, not just in the next 3 to 5 years, but certainly well beyond. And in the next 45 minutes, we want to make sure that we have a really candid conversation, but one that incorporates your questions. So please don't save questions just towards the end, ask them throughout. I've prepared questions for Kevin, but we want to make sure that this is as meaningful and as relevant for every attendee here. So we'll pull from the questions throughout the ongoing conversation. And we're going to cover a number of different areas. We'll start with a little bit of framing on Kevin's journey, the state of the industry. We'll talk about principles around data foundations. We'll dive into travel industry specific insights. And then how do you translate those insights into impact? And then most importantly, we'll look ahead. So I want to pause here and open it up to the first question for you, Kevin, which is, let's set some context. Can you share a little bit about your background and your journey thus far?
For sure, Adam. And by the way, thank you for the invite. I always excited to talk to travel nerds, but especially this group. This will be a good conversation. Yeah, high level, my story. I have been a data nerd, a math nerd for my entire life. I was a physicist by training a long time ago, working in nuclear physics, mostly just because they had the most supercomputer time, and I got to play around with physics on computers. Jumped into startups, fell into Uber like late 2010, joined them as their 20th employee, was thrown very much in the deep end, but like fell in love instantly. This was a company that, even though at the time it was black cars and it was sort of this kind of, limo plus plus experience, was internally very much thinking about the math of travel, right? It was every traffic jam is a math problem. Every how people get around cities, what successfully, unsuccessfully, these are graph traversal problems. And so I ended up spending about 7 years trying to solve that math in both the rideshare setting, and then we got involved in food and the sort of different modalities. And my last couple of years taking on a related but distinct problem in trucking and logistics. So joined Uber early, built a bunch of stuff, invented surge pricing. I'm sure we'll get to that. Ran the data team for about 5 years. After leaving Uber, kind of continued this career of very applied AI, applied data tasks, was chief data officer at Tala Financial, was a multi-time founder, and then ultimately got very interested in supporting founders from a more strategic and financial sense, had been an angel investor for a long time, and ultimately decided to start Rackhouse. We formally incorporated in 2020. It was a project many years in the making, um, to basically put data nerds in business. We were very interested in backing vertical applications of AI backed by these sort of domain experts with a very broad aperture of like what applied AI could mean, with like a special love for these kind of atypical applications. Every VC, every founder was trying to build databases and sort of tools for developers in the Bay Area, um, and I thought both of those were sort of uninteresting. The opportunity was so much bigger than that, and so now I get to do that full time.
Amazing. Kevin, I think you have a unique window of insight in that you started way back, at an earlier point in your career,
Right.
at a company that was focused on mobility and travel. But today you invest in AI native companies across multiple industries. And so, can you share a bit about some of the trends that you've seen broadly across industries, and then perhaps how those might be applying to the travel context today?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I would say when we were getting up and going, it was a much more marketplace approach, both from like sort of business model, but also really, um, I would say that was where the hardest math problems were. It was sort of this idea of like in rideshare, it was can you just sort of connect supply in the form of sort of driver partners who were willing to provide rides and demand really, really quickly, on the time scale of minutes to seconds, in a very distributed way, which implied a lot of servers and a lot of math. And it was just like, can you make markets, right? And Airbnb was sort of similar. You saw a version of this happening. I would say it's sort of an analogous version of this with like Kayak and Expedia of just like, can we connect supply and demand in new ways? All that's, I think, profoundly important. Obviously, that's how revenue is earned. But
Mhm.
as we've shifted into transformers, uh, the markets and the sort of market making mechanisms are pretty well understood. Not to say you couldn't innovate, but the biggest opportunities are actually more in context and workflows, right? It's sort of like, okay, cool. It was interesting in Uber, we have this project we've yet to launch, but I would love to see, which was, can you introduce like multimodal travel that just sort of flows? Like if you want to go from Park Slope in Brooklyn to like San Jose, California, in
Mhm.
theory, it would be like an Uber to a train to a flight to an Uber, probably, right? And stitching together all of those workflows is a context problem, right? And I'm very intrigued by the role that AI and sort of transformers and language models play in being able to create like a machine optimized workflow through what are like six different software regimes, four different regulatory environments, three companies, like the that kind of challenging context management feels like the biggest opportunity right now.
Hmm. We have folks that are coming into um, the world of AI for the very first time across
Mhm.
the travel and mobility space at large, right? And you were early to apply data science to real-time pricing at Uber.
Right.
What did you learn there that you think most companies still get wrong about using data for decision making? Because I think we hear that ideology quite often, and in the context of travel, it oftentimes feels like the holy grail is how can I get my data house in order so that I can then use data for better decision making. But at Uber, would love to hear any particular examples or
Sure.
some of the culture that was built there that you think might be valuable and applicable for the context of some of those that are joining us today.
Lots of stories. I'm happy to go in whichever direction you want to go after this. But the one that definitely jumped out to me is when companies are like, I want to get my data house in order, there is sort of an implicit belief that it's got to be simple, right? I think there's a sort of cognitive bias too, which is like questions which are simple to ask must be simple to answer, right? And the first thing I'd acknowledge is just like data is complex, right? And which is not to say you can't get actionable insights out of it. In fact, I think AI is really good at parsing complexity and just giving you kind of bottom line data. But I often find companies are struggling with like complexity must mean I'm doing something wrong. And it was interesting, like there were two stories that came to mind. The first was we were a few years into Uber, and Travis was a very numbers driven, every meeting had like a slide with numbers on it. And he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, like, how come we don't know how many trips we did in a week?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Every meeting I go into, meeting with different teams, and Uber was sort of tracking how many trips did we do last week, and the numbers were never like way different, but they never footed out exactly." And he was like, "We are in the business of providing transportation. How can we not know how many trips we did in a week? Like, what are you doing wrong?" And so we went on this whole crusade, just like Uber of all companies should know the number of trips we did in a week and why are we so bad at this? And it was fascinating because what you realized was in the number of trips, some teams defined a trip as like Sunday to Sunday, some defined it as Monday to Monday, some people did San Francisco time, some people defined it as UTC time, some people said, well, a trip counts for a given week if it started in that week, or maybe they go by when it ended in that week. And you actually had this idea that even something as simple as just like how many transactions did we do in a week has like 12 different permutations that are all like a couple percentage points different, but nevertheless different. And worse, it wasn't even like an intelligence failure, right? Like an engineering team looks at UTC time because that's how the servers are organized. And an operations team, that's like paying out bonuses on Mondays will naturally think of local time and like Monday to Monday. And so almost like complexity was this emergent property of you being very, very mission driven. Like you were like, look, Uber had a very strong culture of empowerment and like you chase down the best interest of the business. And in that like kind of local optimization, you created complexity, right? So first of all, the point here was like one, complexity is intrinsic in the problems. Two, complexity is actually usually a symptom of you leading in a very, very empowering way. And trying to like collapse these definitions down to like one true, how many trips do we do in a week was both counterproductive and just not realistic in like a large organization. So I think most executives need to kind of establish that success here is not simplicity. It's usually well understood complexity, right? At least at the sort of dashboarding and metrics level. And usually the role of the analyst, of the data scientist, frankly, of the AI at this point is sort of let's be pragmatic about that complexity and nevertheless be like, we need to make usually pretty binary decisions. Are we spending more or less this quarter? Those types of outcomes. So one thing is just kind of embrace the complexity. The other question I remember Travis asking, we can keep it moving, but when we were building dynamic pricing, we had all of these dashboards and metrics, and we were kind of showing how prices were sloping up and down and ensuring reliability. And then he went to me and he was like, Kevin, like, can you tell me like how well we're pricing? Like, is there a more perfect price structure we should be pursuing? And it just was like kind of one of those very classic, like, just can my KPIs be better type question. And I had to explain to Travis that, like, they have awarded multiple Nobel Prizes in economics to answer that. Could we just be pricing better type question? So even the simple questions are sometimes profoundly difficult to answer.
I think that's well stated. So one thing is, Kevin, we're getting a few comments that folks are hearing some echo. So I'm going to mute while you're
Sure.
speaking. If you can mute while I'm asking questions, that hopefully that'll help out with some of the um, references to some audio echoes. I want to share just a kind of quick set of visualizations that I think frames up a lot of the challenges that I've certainly been hearing about in leading Clarisite that I think many of the members within the Corporate Travel AI Network have surfaced that really underpin a lot of what we are speaking about today. And then I can dig into some specific questions related to this set of challenges. So I'm going to go back and share my screen here. So just want to start with some of the feedback that we've heard consistently that is causing some of the challenge for many travel leaders at enterprises. Um, Oftentimes, what we're hearing is in that context of I'm in a small team. Now we're moving into this world where I'm being expected to bring AI into the functionality in which I'm driving my program. Um, what you see on the left side of this screen is oftentimes not only what people are feeling but hearing directly, which is the size of my team is not going to expand in the future, and at the same time, I have all of the underlying data that I need to be able to run my program with not just retrospective and perhaps reactive uh, action taking, but I want to be proactive and I want to get out of the administrative and operational responsibilities and move into the proactive strategic management of my program. And oftentimes, what we'll see is that folks need to be able to create the impact of a team of 10, but do so with a team of three. And so the next piece of this equation is that for many folks, they already have the data. It's just not formatted and unified, reconciled, and built into a foundational model that then allows them to be able to extract the right insights and actions. And so in this case, you might see, the question come up, how much did we spend on Marriott this year? And some of the data lives in a travel management company, some of it lives in card, might actually be across multiple TMCs for many companies. Some of this lives in expense reports. And so you have three systems, three different components of the answer, but one core question that you need to be able to solve for. And there's oftentimes zero agreement across these three different systems. And this question requires you to be able to extract data from what is ultimately tens of thousands, or in some cases, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of individual transactions that are occurring across an enterprise. And so, what ends up occurring is that if you're looking to leverage AI to solve for this, you end up compounding the magnitude of the errors that that question is going to generate from an agent or an AI assistant if you don't have confidence in that underlying data. And so, I love this idea that there isn't a race to adopt AI first. It's actually a race to build the right data foundation that makes the AI trustworthy. And so once you've done so, you need to create that unified data layer. You then have your source aware intelligence. You probably want some degree of confidence scoring within that. And you move from a place to say, hey, we have a program of 50 million or 10 million or 300 million that we think lives in these different channels of spend to actually having clarity and moving from guesswork to governance. And so I think that's a visual representation of the pain and the friction that so many are perhaps feeling today. And so my core question for you is when you think about building a program that before it even truly adopts AI is actually AI ready, is it tooling? Is it talent? Is it somewhere deep within the data foundation that you would advocate that the leaders that are joining for this particular session should focus on first?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I actually think the mindset around becoming ready, AI ready, has probably shifted in the last 4 or 5 years. Like, I often felt like the attitude, um, frankly, I led many of these efforts in like the 2010s had been we need to do some sort of like data lake or data warehouse establishment program. We need to go on like the long data schlep of just getting like everything into like one single source of truth was like the big thing. And partially that had to do with the reality that some of our sort of computational techniques, and this is like much more at like the CPU level, just needed co-located information to get you results in a finite amount of time. But a lot of it just had to do with the idea that like data scientists only knew how to work with like structured sort of, if it had to be a data that fits in a table. I think a lot of those assumptions have changed here in the last 5 years. One of the more underappreciated aspects of transformers and the sort of LLM based set of tools is one, they work phenomenally well with unstructured data, i.e., emails, documents, playbooks, long form text. And two, they're actually pretty good at like recursively refining their own processes. So if you sort of say, here are 50 PDFs, can you pull me out how much money I spent at Marriott? And this is 50 PDFs representing like all of that crap that we were just discussing, throw it in the context window and say like, can you give me how much we spent in Marriott out of all of these expense reports? It can do it. Um, and that I think is a pretty profound outcome. And then coming along and saying, okay, if I wanted to automate this process in the future, could you describe to me a set of steps that would make your life simpler, right? Like the fact that the tool can like give you proactive advice on how to use it better is, in my experience, profoundly unique with most of these AI products. Usually it was like you started requiring a PhD and then it got harder from there. I think these are a little bit more approachable if you're just willing to kind of be vulnerable with the tool. So the most important thing, in my opinion, is to start, right? In some sense of just, and I don't want to trivialize this because I do think that there are significant organizational hurdles around data privacy and security and like getting comfortable with this introduces a whole set of like internal threat vectors if you're not careful. So even just starting to have the conversation of, in the most basic sense, pick your favorite provider, Claude, ChatGPT, Microsoft, what have you. But just getting this sort of basic workflow going of saying, okay, what is a question that I think an AI could, in theory, answer? What I think is really interesting about even the formulation you gave is I think we're going to see this sort of recurring sort of cycle of being like increasingly proactive or increasingly objective based, right? The example you showed there of how much did I spend at Marriott across these three or four systems is not really a question you've like asked a dashboard, right? 5 years ago, you would have just sort of said like, look, like bin spend by vendor, and then by source by vendor, and then you're kind of doing like algebra in your head to get to your number, and it was and you'd end up with approximations. Now we're asking questions like, how much did I spend at Marriott? The next questions I think we'll be asking in 3 or 4 years is like, okay, let me look at my company's sales velocity. Let me look at how many sales calls, and sales trips and just basic operational metrics. What's that going to mean for my travel in 2 or 3 years? And the question you're really going to be asking the AI is like, what deal should I be negotiating with Marriott that puts my company in the best position over 5 years? That is a much more strategic, objective-based question. And of course, one of the steps in that is going to be, how much do I spend now? How much will I be spending next year, kind of thing. Like that's of course a question you'd ask in the strategy, but you're becoming kind of increasingly strategic and letting these sort of systems handle the intermediate Q&A. And so part of it is like adopting the mindset of trying to identify the right questions to be asking. Part of this just get started, right? Like it's definitely a learned skill in the age of AI. And then over time, what you'll find is all of that tactical stuff of sort of, there will be a time you should probably have a data warehouse and a lake and a set of dashboards, but they become intermediate milestones on a much more like objective based journey your company is going on with AI?
Um, that's fantastic. So, if you were a leader evaluating a corporate travel program today, what are the first two or three steps or data assets that you'd prioritize building or fixing to unlock the value of AI in your program?
For sure. I think one thing, even before I would start with build, so I actually think a very common mistake is you kind of start from the attitude of the first thing I must do is build something. Like I
Mhm.
would actually, there's actually kind of a step zero, which is to say, we are not in the realm of like artificial general intelligence and the sort of super brain. AI is unlikely to fix sort of like a broken organizational vision. You can't like math your way out of like a business that doesn't really have a clear objective. Um, Oftentimes, if anything, this will exacerbate it. It's like if we don't really know what our like purpose, what our mission is as a set of humans, as a business for the next year or two, um, AI will just help us wander aimlessly much more quickly, not actually like get you out of the woods any faster. So step zero is like, I really think it's sort of an idea of, in the most basic qualitative sense, like what phase of the business are we in? Is this a belt tightening, cost cutting cycle? Is this a, look, we're inflecting and we as a travel team need to be, moving at least as quickly as the rest of the business? Is this a we've got this major push into, maybe we're acquiring somebody in a different continent, and we just have this like, sort of side quest the business is going on. You got to know what you're doing first. Um, and then from that, I think there is the sort of natural sense of, okay, let's give people the basic AI tools, LLM tools that they need. And that's a conversation with your CISO, with your security team. There's probably a procurement conversation in there. And then from there, I think the best thing a leader should track, I still believe this was true then, is true now, is like leaders can't solve problems they're not aware of. They can't improve problems they're not tracking. What is so interesting about a lot of these tools, even the basic LLM type tools, is they're actually really good at like synthesizing qualitative work. So I think oftentimes where like travel teams, in my experience, have struggled is like so much of the work is not like lines of code written, pull requests merged, leads closed. It's a lot more operation, right? It's a lot more, we unblock this, we push these sorts of things. So I would get really good at sort of productivity measurement and frankly, like using AI tools. You'd be amazed what you can do with ChatGPT with a like a Gmail and GCal subscription and just sort of say like put together a one-page summary of what I got done in the last week as just a basic two-sentence type prompt and build from there. Um, but once you get to that place, then you call up the Clarisite guys, right? And start looking at tools like this. I think that what you'll find is once you've kind of oriented at some sort of, I have a vision, I have a objective. Um, the kind of at least the tactical goals get much more clear. If it's like we're on a belt tightening phase, it's like, okay, let's figure out the most efficient, fewest steps between now and goal to cut X dollars from the following Y sort of spend categories or something, right? Like that would be a pretty obvious next step. Okay, that's like basic sort of business strategy. The hard part is like how, right? Like, okay, and what you realize is with a lot of this spend, for example, I don't, we've been spending a bunch of time together, is um, you end up in this kind of guess and check game if you're not careful. You're like, well, what happens if I move my Marriott spend from here to here and then I'll let it chunk? And that's one, you're like kind of feeling out the solution space in this very kind of like stabby type way. Um, I think that you as a team need to say, all right, like we can do a random walkthrough spend, or you can start finding these companies like Clarisite, which are really good at bringing the context sort of from a kind of guess and check to a much more comprehensive solution. And then I think but ultimately it's just like a way to get to that future a lot more quickly with a lot more efficiency. But yeah, I mean, I wish there was sort of some profound like plug in AI and all your problems go away, but in some sense, we've all got great job security in that sense.
So I want to make sure that we're also pulling in some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. I'll touch on one here, and I would encourage anybody that is in the audience, feel free to drop some questions into the Q&A box so that we can make sure that this is tailored to exactly what is most top of mind for you and your respective program. But there's a question about data privacy. It was something that you referenced earlier. The question is just broadly, where does data privacy come into play?
Yeah, so I think where I stand is like we are simultaneously in a place where I think a lot of the concerns you hear about data privacy and you're seeing these sort of headlines around, somebody like deleted half their code base or, an AI like shipped all their data to Kazakhstan or something. I think is overblown, and the reality is in the sense that that is kind of intentionally sensationalist to drive engagement, while also acknowledging AI is a technology that, if used poorly, can introduce threat vectors inside of a company, and in that sense needs to be treated with a lot of seriousness. So the basic reality here is um, that AI tools, AI systems in general, and I think even if you're talking about, and I'm being intentionally vague, which is to say, like a chatbot window, like you're in chatgpt.com, an agent, an AI product are usually just like more elaborate compositions of the same sort of fundamental tools. Like there's still an LLM that takes an action. So from a security point of view, it's kind of all the same set of risks, which is what information does the AI have access to? Where is that information going? Is it staying within your four walls or is it going to a third-party model provider? And if that information is leaving or crossing a trust boundary, what assurances do I have that that third party is respecting our data privacy policies, right? Like, is all my travel data going to Sam Altman's inbox? That's probably a problem, kind of thing, right? I think the reality here is that like a lot of the underlying model providers recognize that enterprises themselves do not very, very rationally would not use their products if they didn't have privacy guarantees. So there is, I think, a pretty straightforward process for most companies to say, look, Microsoft has a set of tools with very, very well documented data privacy guarantees. It's in languages that any enterprise CISO would be able to understand. Anthropic and Claude offer similar products. Usually, where companies get into trouble is they are while they're in the process of kind of deciding what they want to do. Employees are like signing up for like the consumer version of ChatGPT and bringing it into work. And make no mistake, these consumer products, especially if it's free, the sort of long-standing adage in the internet is, if you're not paying for anything, you are the product. The free versions of ChatGPT and Claude are data harvesting operations. They're saying, we will give you this product for free, and then we will use your conversations as training data. Like those cannot be used in the workplace if you have data privacy requirements. So part of my encouragement to everybody to like kind of take a more proactive stance is you can head off the most problematic cases, which is employees kind of irresponsibly mixing the consumer versions, which don't have data privacy guarantees,
Mhm.
because the enterprise option doesn't exist yet.
Mm.
The second thing I'd say is,
Sorry, and Kevin, just to
yeah, you
build
go.
on that question, I think it's anonymous, but I think it's the same person who was asking specifically when they were asking about data privacy. It was training on their unique
Yeah.
data in your perspective.
So almost uh, all third-party AI companies are required to have a clear policy as to whether or not they're going to train on data or which data is considered trainable and which isn't. Even, for example, we're looking at like AI assistants, AI chiefs of staff as an investment thesis. And that's become the place where they have this sort of odd policy within that niche of the industry where if you're using their product for free, they'll train on the conversation you have with the AI, but not the data that like the, business data that it brings in sort of out of band. not to say necessarily that's the right product for this audience, but my point is these terms of service are clearly documented. When in doubt, go to your favorite enterprise vendors. So like Microsoft for sure, Amazon is offering this. What I will say is there is oftentimes a sort of implicit conversation companies are having, which is like a version of, well, OpenAI says they're not training on our data, but what if they secretly are? Like, what if the terms of service are kind of bullshit? Um, I will say to tell you this. One, I think that's just a form of sort of like fear and uncomfort with AI manifesting in sort of security talk. Like, if we're in a world where legal contracts have no enforceability, then we're kind of lost in general. Like the Microsoft doesn't write deals that they're not prepared to honor. To say nothing of the basic reality of if Microsoft was secretly harvesting data, somebody would have said something by now. So one, it's like read the terms of service. This is good advice in general, but especially in AI. Recognize there are an increasingly large set of AI tools which don't train on data. Um, and then I think you kind of have to trust the enforceability of these contracts, for sure.
Yeah. The other thing I'll add in from a lot of conversations with members of this corporate travel AI network is a lot of folks are entering their experience with AI, but just saying, hey, I'm going to extract data, I'm going to throw it into ChatGPT or whatever tool my company is using. There's a lot of sensitivity with travel specific data because it oftentimes incorporates PII. And so that's where it becomes really important to either have a purpose built solution or make sure that you're reading those terms of service really carefully and that your company has the appropriate guardrails in place and protective measures. But generally, extracting information that has PII and then throwing it in GPT and asking some questions is probably not a great idea. So just things for folks to be aware of as you're looking to leverage AI more and more within your program. We have about 5 minutes left, and we have a handful of
Sure.
great questions that have come in. So I want to ask them, and we'll do kind of semi-lightning round here. One that came in from Steve Clag here was math is deterministic, AI is probabilistic. Given that AI systems can return different answers to the same question, how should we evaluate the reliability and repeatability of AI generated insights when making strategic travel program decisions?
For sure. So one of the biggest breakthroughs, and I'd say this has really happened in the last 5 or 6 months, is in the AI field, this is sort of known as like task adherence or rule following, which is trying to reduce the dimensions upon which an AI is probabilistic, right? So for a good example here is if you're asking like an AI an analytical question a year or two ago, it would have basically attempted to answer that question by traversing just like a transformer architecture. In the last year, certainly, definitely in the last 5 months, what you're starting to see is an AI making a more meta decision, which is sort of like, okay, I'm being asked to do an analytical question, an analytical task, requires a much more deterministic answer. Let me write a computer program or like a Python script to answer this, or check if I've already written the Python script before and reused the same script. So there are sort of meta techniques which are reducing the amount of dispersion and hallucination that the effectively manifest as a hallucination. Um, and so I think in general, what you should be looking at is a basic sense of one, when you're evaluating models from more of a sort of vibe or just everyday use case point of view, the question is not did it answer my one specific question. If I'm looking for five as an output, how often does it say five? But more of is this model doing a good job of recognizing when I want a deterministic repeated answer or not? It's more of a is the problem approach right? Um, and then secondly, what I generally recommend if you're in a place where you're trying to build or fine tune or train your own models, evaluation suites, benchmarks, or a form of benchmarking are an incredibly good use of time. Having your team sit down and usually you don't need like thousands and thousands of results. I've seen teams get really good results where you say, I'm going to do 50 question and answer pairs to sort of say like, here is a task I might give an AI and I will evaluate in plain human language what I wanted it to do, like what the correct answer might be. By the way, using like playbooks or even employee onboarding manuals is sort of a jumping off point here. You've had to teach humans how to do the job well. Um, so getting up to a place where you've got maybe 50 gold standard examples of like, this is what I would expect the correct outcome to be can be really helpful for evaluating an AI, where either I've seen humans as judges. If you want to get really fancy, you can use another AI to judge, like, here's what the AI output, here's what the human said it should do. Are these effectively the same outcome? That can give you some sanity when you're like, okay, I've got the Google model and now the Anthropic guys want to sell me their product. Is this a better or worse product? Sometimes, like a head-to-head competition using a benchmark or evaluation set can be very, very productive.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Kevin said here. Steve, we're seeing really, really extraordinary acceleration in the reduction of the probabilistic scenarios that AI is going to generate back when you ask specific, in particular, insight-driven questions. Also, this is where building dedicated agents that understand a more narrow context window rather than a wider context window
For
uh,
sure.
is an emerging trend, and we're seeing a lot of strength, I would say, and refinement that's leading to consistent answers that even 3 months ago might have had a wider swath. Narrowing that context window and then building dedicated agents has been really powerful. We have a couple other questions here, and we're right at time. So I just want to call out Karen asked a question. How do I get my company to pay for something that they think we should be able to build internally with BI? I'll say, Karen, I'll follow up with you separately on this. We're going to do a dedicated session on this shortly, likely in the next couple of months, because we've heard this question come up so many times from members within this corporate travel AI network about how do I build a business case to get the buy-in and financial support so that I can adopt the right solution for the needs that I have when I'm often being told just leverage BI. And the reality is, in some cases, you probably should see if you can build it yourself, and that's oftentimes a great use case to be able to say it's not possible, or it's going to be so time consuming or inaccurate. I think the other big piece here that I've heard about consistently, including in a call with a member earlier this morning, is very few people that aren't in travel understand the nuance and the complexity of travel data. And so I'll follow up with you separately on that. I think we're probably going to build a working group within the community to address this question specifically. And then Orly asked a question, maybe really last one, if you have a closing thought here, Kevin, on sovereign AI and this notion that, for global companies that have individuals, travelers, leaders across various markets, are you seeing kind of a closing down of some of those walls where different nations are saying, we want to only use this model or that model?
Yep,
Are you seeing that perhaps across your portfolio of companies, and any closing thoughts on this kind of
for
new world
sure.
that we're entering and the impact of sovereign AI?
By the way, not to backtrack, but Karen, one thing I would also just chime in here is, one of the best things we can do as leaders is raise our company's ambitions. So when you're being told to build something with BI, sometimes even building a fake data set and then feeding it to an AI product, like figure out a way to sort of sidestep the privacy questions and then just say, look, hypothetically, had we had an LLM, this is what you could be, this is what a Monday morning meeting could look like, kind of thing. I don't think it's an accident that a lot of consumer and prosumer AI products, even think like note takers, they start by giving you like the full featured like AI plus plus version for like 2 weeks and then taking it away. Like loss of version is a real motivating factor to realize like, oh wow, I didn't realize how great this could be till I saw it for a little bit. So just one thought there. Sovereign AI. Yes, so I think that the world is sort of breaking into three sort of rough spheres of influence. US and sort of the West, China, and then somewhat into Europe. You've seen Mistral, Aleph Alpha, and I think if you're a global company, you should probably think about having AI solutions in each of those spheres. Um, what is nice from the technology point of view is there's a set of tools sort of on the model routing layer. It's called the most well-known one is called Open Router, but there are several where you can build one unified software stack that then routes to a specific AI based on the metadata for the request. So European, uh, a good example of this is especially like European AI regulation. You can say this is a request coming from a European customer, ergo route it to the EU AI stack. So ultimately, I think as a firm, you want to have like one unified software stack as much as regulation allows. And then routing layers can be really helpful to keep yourself sane. It's sort of a shim that just lives inside of your existing tech stack. Hopefully, it keeps the amount of complexity relatively minimized. One of the cool things about how quickly AI is growing is um, technical differences are commoditizing relatively quickly. So it's hard to expect that one market will be, too far ahead of the others. It's all math and research, so they tend to copy each other pretty quick. Adam, thank you again for inviting me.
Yeah, so just in closing, I'll share my screen one more time here. But first and foremost, Kevin, I want to say thank you for joining us today. I spend a lot of time with Kevin as we've been building out Clarisight's product, and just to have access to somebody who just is such a forward thinker and also seeing how AI is coming into products across various industries. I thought it'd be really beneficial for the corporate travel AI network community as well as those across travel at large to kind of hear some of his perspective, how he's seeing leading products get built, and most importantly, implemented in the context of companies and the lives of individuals. So, for those that aren't in the community yet, simple QR code up here if you wanted to check it out. We'll continue to do private events, a lot of gatherings, dinners, and also one-to-one peer connections and content coming forward throughout the rest of the year. But Kevin, again, thank you for spending some time with us, and to all of you that have joined us live today. Really appreciate your time and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yeah, Adam, thanks for the invite. I enjoyed it. I think you guys are definitely seeing the future of what corporate travel could be like, and happy to add my thoughts to the bonfire that is Clariset.
Perfect. And also, I shared this before, but Kevin posts a ton of fantastic content on LinkedIn, so I would encourage you to follow him and again engage in these ongoing conversations. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and your week.
Thanks, everybody.